For 5 years, Anya Sheridan believed she had the perfect, simple life. She had a handsome, ambitious husband, a cozy apartment in the city, and their first child on the way. She'd given up everything for that life, hiding who she truly was, to be loved for herself. But in the hushed, gilded dining room of Athelred's New York's most exclusive restaurant, that perfect life was about to be systematically dismantled. With her husband sitting silently beside her, another woman, a beautiful and cruel stranger, leaned in and called her worthless plain and a pathetic pregnant ball and chain. What that stranger didn't know, what her own husband had forgotten, was that the simple, unassuming ring on Anya's finger wasn't just jewelry. It was a key, a symbol of power so vast it could turn cities to dust and bring empires to their knees. And she was about to use it. Anya traced the rim of her coffee mug, the ceramic warm against her fingertips. Outside their fourth-floor walk-up, the sounds of a bustling Brooklyn morning filtered in the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of the subway, the cheerful chatter of neighbors. It was a symphony she had grown to love, a world away from the echoing silence of marble halls and the suffocating weight of expectation she had been born into. Here she was, just Anya Sheridan, wife to Nicholas Sheridan, a rising star in the competitive world of corporate finance. Soon she would be a mother. A faint smile touched her lips as she felt a gentle flutter in her belly. This was real. This was the life she had chosen, built on love and authenticity, not on a name whispered in awe and fear in the boardrooms of Europe and Asia. Nicholas had been her escape. They met in a university library, a charming, ferociously intelligent business student with eyes that saw her, not her legacy. He was captivated by her quiet wit and her passion for art history, never once questioning why a student with her knowledge wasn't attending a more prestigious Ivy League school. To him, she was just Anya, a brilliant, beautiful woman from a modest background whose parents had passed away, leaving her with a small but comfortable trust fund. It was a carefully constructed fiction she had guarded for 6 years. "Morning, beautiful." Nick's voice, still thick with sleep, came from the bedroom doorway. He was already knotting his tie, a sharp Armani suit clinging to his athletic frame. He strode over and kissed her temple, his gaze lingering on her still flat stomach. "How are my two favorite people?" "We're good," she murmured, leaning into his embrace. "Just enjoying the quiet before the city wakes up." "I have to run. Big meeting with the board at Sterling Nash. This quarter's projections are insane. If I land this, a partnership is practically guaranteed." His eyes gleamed with an ambition that had once thrilled her, but had recently begun to feel sharp, edged. "That's wonderful, Nick." She meant it, but a small, cold knot formed in her stomach. The bigger he got, the more he talked about status, about appearances. He'd started making comments about her simple wardrobe, her lack of interest in high society charity balls, the very things he used to admire as signs of her grounded nature. "Hey," he said, tilting her chin up. "Once this deal is done, we're out of this place. I'm talking a penthouse overlooking the park, a driver. You won't have to walk up a single stair again." She forced a smile. "I like the stairs. It's good exercise." He sighed, a sound of faint exasperation. "Anya, it's not about the exercise. It's about what it looks like. The VP of Sterling Nash shouldn't live in a walk-up. It's time we started looking the part." He kissed her again, a quick, dismissive peck, and was gone. The scent of his expensive cologne lingered, an alien fragrance in their simple home. The cold knot in her stomach tightened. He used to love this apartment. He used to call it their haven. Now it was an embarrassment. The change had been gradual over the last year. It started with late nights at the office, which she'd accepted as part of his climb up the corporate ladder. Then came the hushed phone calls he'd take on the balcony, the screen of his phone angled away from her. He started spending more money on watches, suits, and weekends with the boys in the Hamptons, weekends she was never invited to, dismissed with a wave of his hand. "It's all business, honey. You'd be bored to tears." She tried to ignore the warning bells. She was pregnant. Hormones made you paranoid, right? Nick loved her. He was just under pressure. But deep down, a part of her, the part that had been trained since birth to read people with cold, analytical precision, knew something was fundamentally wrong. The man she married was being eroded, replaced by a stranger who measured worth in dollars and square footage. That afternoon, while doing laundry, she found it. A receipt tucked into the pocket of his trousers from the previous week. It wasn't for a business dinner. It was from a boutique on Madison Avenue, so exclusive it didn't even have a sign, only a discreet, tastefully lit window. The charge was for a Delvaux Tempête handbag. The price made her gasp. It was more than 3 months of their rent. It wasn't a gift for her. Her birthday was months away, and he knew she disliked such extravagant displays. Her hands trembled as she held the slip of paper. This wasn't a business expense. This was a gift. A very, very personal gift for someone else. The name on the receipt was what stopped her breath. It wasn't his name. It was a customer account name, B. Cole. Later that evening, as Nick regaled her with tales of his triumphant meeting, she watched him. Really watched him. The way his eyes didn't quite meet hers. The way he checked his phone every few minutes, a slight, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips as he typed. The authentic man she had fallen in love with was gone. In his place was a polished facade, and behind it a web of lies. And Anya knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she was no longer the only woman in his life. The simple world she had so carefully constructed was about to shatter, and she was terrified of the person she would have to become when it did. The serpent had a name, Bianca Cole. Anya discovered her the way most modern discoveries are made, through the cold, curated lens of social media. After a sleepless night fueled by the sickening discovery of the handbag receipt, Anya had typed the name B. Cole and Nicholas Sheridan into a search engine. The results were a digital punch to the gut. Bianca Cole was everything Anya was not. She was a public figure, a lifestyle influencer and socialite whose life was a meticulously documented performance of wealth and leisure. Her Instagram feed was a kaleidoscope of yacht parties, fashion week front rows, and VIP lounges. In dozens of photos, Nick was there, not lurking in the background, but proudly by her side. In one picture taken at a polo match in the Hamptons, one of the boring business weekends, he had his arm wrapped possessively around Bianca's waist. She was laughing, head thrown back, a picture of carefree glamour. Tucked into the crook of her arm was the Delvaux Tempête handbag. Each photo was a small, sharp betrayal. Anya saw her husband, her Nick, looking at Bianca with an adoration he hadn't shown her in years. He wasn't the stressed, ambitious man who came home to their Brooklyn apartment. He was a different person, entirely confident, carefree, and utterly smitten. Bianca was the woman Nick was becoming for a world he desperately wanted to join. A world of new money where status was loud and flaunted, not quietly held. It was a world of flash and performance, the complete antithesis of the one Anya had abandoned. The gaslighting began in earnest. When Anya, her voice shaking, finally confronted him, she didn't show him the pictures. She started small with the late nights. "You've been working so hard, Nick. I'm worried about you," she said over dinner, pushing pasta around her plate. He didn't look up from his phone. "Have to, honey. The Sterling Nash deal is a monster. It feels like you're never here anymore. We don't talk." He finally looked at her, his expression a carefully crafted mask of concern. "Baby, I'm doing this for us. For the baby. Do you know how much a good private school costs in this city? I'm building our future." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. It felt cold. "Don't add to my stress. I need your support." He was twisting it, making her feel guilty, selfish. A few days later, she tried again, mentioning the receipt. "I found a receipt from a boutique, Nick, for a very expensive handbag." His reaction was immediate and chillingly smooth. He laughed. "Oh, that. Jesus, you had me worried. It was a gift for Patricia Harding, the CEO's wife. Her birthday. You have to play the game, Anya. It's schmoozing. It's how things get done." It was a plausible lie. A perfect lie. But she knew it wasn't the truth. The account name was B. Cole. Yet to call him on it would be to reveal she was investigating him. To admit their marriage was a thing of suspicion, not trust. She let it go, the unspoken truth hanging between them like a toxic fog. He started to criticize her more openly. One evening, as she was getting ready for a simple dinner with friends, he scanned her outfit, a tasteful but modest dress, with a frown. "Is that what you're wearing?" he asked, his tone laced with disappointment. "What's wrong with it?" Anya asked, her heart sinking. "It's just plain, Anya. You're a beautiful woman, but you dress like a librarian." "Bianca." He stopped himself, but it was too late. The name was out. Anya's blood ran cold. "Bianca." He recovered quickly. "Bianca Cole. She's a brand consultant the firm hired. She was just talking about the importance of power dressing, of projecting success. It's all part of the game. I just want people to see you the way I do." It was the cruelest kind of lie wrapped in the guise of a compliment. He was comparing her to his mistress, and she was coming up short. He wasn't just having an affair, he was actively trying to mold Anya into a pale imitation of the other woman, or perhaps trying to justify to himself why he was straying. The serpent was no longer just a digital ghost. Her venom was seeping into their home, poisoning every interaction. Anya felt herself shrinking, her confidence eroding with every veiled insult and dismissive gesture. She started to doubt herself. Was she not enough? Was her desire for a simple, authentic life a weakness? Was she holding him back? The pregnancy, which should have been their greatest joy, became her deepest vulnerability. She was tied to him financially and emotionally. Leaving was a terrifying prospect, but staying was a slow, soul-crushing agony. She was trapped, and Nick, guided by the whispers of his serpent, was tightening the bars of the cage every single day. She knew a confrontation was inevitable. She just didn't realize it would be a public execution. The invitation was an olive branch, or so he'd claimed. "Anya, I've been a jerk," Nick had said a week later, catching her in a moment of weary vulnerability. He looked genuinely contrite, his eyes soft for the first time in months. "The pressure at work. I've been taking it out on you, and it's not fair. Please let me make it up to you. I've booked a table at Ethelred's on Saturday. Just the two of us. To celebrate the baby. To celebrate us." Ethelred's. The name alone was a statement. It was a bastion of old New York, a place with a century-long wait list that could only be circumvented by status or immense wealth. It was the kind of place Nick had dreamed of entering, a symbol of the world he was so desperate to conquer. A part of Anya, the weary, hopeful part that still loved her husband, wanted to believe him. Maybe this was his way of reconnecting, of choosing her and their life together. The other part, the cold, clear-eyed observer, recognized it for what it was, a performance. But she was tired of fighting. "Okay, Nick," she agreed softly. "I'd like that." On Saturday evening, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tensions. Anya had chosen a simple, elegant navy silk dress. It was understated but expensive, one of the few pieces she kept from her old life. Nick, however, looked her over with a familiar flicker of disappointment. "It's nice," he said, adjusting his own flawlessly tailored Tom Ford suit. The compliment landed like a stone. Nice, plain, simple. The words echoed in her mind. Ethelred's was as opulent as its reputation suggested. Mahogany-paneled walls, tables draped in heavy white linen, and the air filled with the quiet murmur of the city's elite. The maitre d', a severe-looking man named Mr. Dubois, greeted Nick with a barely concealed sniff of disdain, his eyes flicking over him as if he were a fraudulent check. But when he saw Anya, his expression shifted. A flicker of what? Recognition, deference. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving Anya to wonder if she'd imagined it. They were seated at a prime table, clearly one Nick had paid a premium to secure. He was stiff and nervous, a man playing a role he hadn't yet earned. He ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than their first couch and began an awkward monologue about his achievements at the firm. Anya listened, a silent observer at her own husband's one-man show. They were halfway through their appetizers when a voice, sharp and syrupy sweet, cut through the dining room's decorum. "Nikki, darling, what a surprise!" Anya didn't need to look up. She felt a chill crawl down her spine. Bianca Cole stood beside their table, a vision in a glittering backless red dress that was entirely too loud for the restaurant's staid elegance. She was undeniably stunning, a cascade of blonde hair, surgically perfected features, and a predatory confidence that sucked all the air from her vicinity. Nick shot to his feet, his face a mask of panicked surprise. "Bianca, what are you? I didn't know you came here." "Oh, I have my ways." She purred, her eyes sliding over to Anya, dismissing her in a single contemptuous glance. "And who is this?" The question was a deliberate dagger. She knew exactly who Anya was. "Bianca, this is my wife Anya." Nick stammered, his hand hovering awkwardly in the air. "Oh," Bianca said, the single syllable dripping with pity. "The wife, of course." She extended a hand laden with diamond rings towards Anya. Her grip was limp, her nails sharp. "So lovely to finally meet you. Nick has told me, well, he's mentioned you." The insult was perfectly delivered. Anya simply nodded her hand, dropping to her lap, where she twisted the simple gold band on her finger. A band her grandmother had given her. It wasn't an engagement ring. It was something far older, far more significant. Bianca wasn't done. She pulled up a chair from a nearby vacant table without asking, seating herself as if she belonged there. "So, Anya," she began, her voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, "what is it you do? Nick is such a titan, a real mover and shaker. I imagine it must be hard to keep up." "I'm an art history consultant," Anya said quietly, using her well-rehearsed cover story. "I work with private collectors." Bianca let out a tinkling, condescending laugh. "How quaint. A little hobby to keep you busy. That's sweet." She turned her full attention back to Nick, placing a hand on his arm. "Nicky, you will not believe the call I got today. Jean-Pierre wants to shoot me for the cover of his Monaco issue. We simply must go. My villa has the most divine view of the harbor." Anya watched her husband. He was preening under Bianca's attention, his earlier nervousness replaced by a pathetic, puffed-up pride. He had brought his wife to this temple of the elite only to have her humiliated by his mistress. And he was letting it happen. No, he was enjoying it. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an ambush. A planned public execution of their marriage. The main course arrived, but Anya couldn't eat. The food tasted like ash. Bianca dominated the conversation, her voice a weapon, each word designed to highlight Anya's perceived inadequacies. She talked about their shared ambitions, their plans, their world. A world in which Anya had no place. The final brutal blow came when Bianca's eyes landed on Anya's stomach. "Oh, and you're pregnant," she said, as if noticing a stain on the tablecloth. "I suppose that happens. It's a shame. It really does ruin a woman's body, and it ties a man down when he's on the verge of greatness." She looked at Nick, her expression a mix of theatrical sympathy and smug ownership. "Don't you worry, Nicky. We won't let a little thing like that get in the way of your destiny." Anya looked at Nick, pleading with her eyes. "Defend me. Defend our child. Say something." He just shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a coward in a $1,000 suit. He cleared his throat and mumbled, "Bianca, maybe we should—" But he didn't finish. He didn't defend her. He didn't tell Bianca to leave. In his silence, Anya heard the death knell of her marriage. The hope she had clung to finally withered and died. And in its place, something cold and hard began to crystallize. The woman who was just Anya Sheridan was fading. Another woman, someone she had long kept buried, was starting to wake up. The air grew thick with unspoken violence. Anya felt the curious, pitying stares of the other diners. They were witnessing a blood sport, the public culling of a weak animal from the herd. Bianca, sensing her victory, leaned in for the kill. "You know, Anya," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still perfectly audible. I almost feel sorry for you. You tried. You landed a man with potential. But you have no idea how to nurture it. A man like Nick needs a partner, not an anchor. He needs a woman who can walk into a room and command it, who understands power, not someone who hides in a fourth-floor walk-up wearing whatever that is. She gestured dismissively at Anya's dress. It was the final straw. The dress wasn't just fabric. It was a memory, a link to a past she had cherished. But to this woman, it was just another symbol of Anya's inadequacy. Nick remained silent, his gaze fixed on his water glass, his knuckles white. His cowardice was more painful than Bianca's cruelty. Anya took a slow, deep breath, the air cool in her lungs. The fear and hurt that had been churning inside her vanished, replaced by an unnerving, absolute calm. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of ice. The transition was complete. Anya Sheridan, the hopeful, loving wife, was gone. In her place sat Anya von Hesse. She met Bianca's triumphant gaze. Her own eyes, once warm and soft, now as cool and clear as diamond. "You talk a great deal about power," Anya said, her voice quiet but carrying an authority that made Bianca blink. "But you clearly don't understand the first thing about it. You mistake noise for influence. You think this—" She gestured vaguely at Bianca's glittering dress and the opulent room — "is power. This is just scenery. It's a stage for people like you to perform on." Bianca scoffed, thrown off by the sudden change in demeanor. "Oh, and I suppose you're the expert." "Yes," Anya replied simply. "As a matter of fact, I am." She slowly, deliberately held up her left hand. Not the one with her wedding ring, the worthless symbol of a broken vow, but the right. On her fourth finger was the simple gold band she had been twisting. It looked like nothing, a family heirloom perhaps. To the untrained eye it was worthless. But it wasn't just a ring. It was a signet. "You see this ring?" Anya asked, her voice steady and clear. The surrounding tables had gone silent, drawn into the unfolding drama. Bianca squinted at it. "What, that cheap little thing? Did it come from a flea market?" She reached out, her lacquered nails poised to touch it, to mock it. "I wouldn't—" Anya warned, her voice dropping an octave, laced with a command that was utterly foreign to Bianca and Nick. Bianca froze, her hand hovering in the air. With her other hand, Anya slowly twisted the ring on her finger. There was a faint click, and the flat top of the signet popped open, revealing not a hollow space, but a meticulously engraved crest carved into the gold beneath. It was a design of breathtaking intricacy and ancient lineage. A silver falcon, wings outstretched, clutching a golden key in its talons, all set against a field of azure enamel. The von Hesse family crest. A symbol recognized in the highest echelons of global finance, politics, and old-world aristocracy. A symbol of a fortune so vast and old, it made new money titans like the men Nick worshipped look like lottery winners. "My name," Anya said, her eyes locked on Bianca's, "is Anya von Hesse. The ring was a gift from my grandmother Genevieve von Hesse on my 16th birthday. And you are sitting at a table in a restaurant that my family's private equity firm has owned for the last 87 years. A collective gasp went through the room. Nick's head snapped up, his face draining of all color. He stared at the ring, then at Anya, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The name. Von Hesse. He'd heard it whispered in the boardroom at Sterling Nash, a name synonymous with unimaginable silent power. The whales, who could make or break markets with a single phone call. He thought it was a myth, a legend. Bianca's smug expression dissolved into a mask of stunned disbelief. You're lying." As if on cue, the maitre d', Mr. Dubois, was at their table. He had been watching from afar, and the moment he saw the crest, he began moving. He bypassed Nick and Bianca completely, his face a picture of abject terror and reverence. He bowed low before Anya, his earlier disdain replaced by groveling desperation. "Duchessa von Hesse," he murmured, his voice trembling. "Forgive me. I did not recognize you. Your table, it is unacceptable. We have the private suite ready. Please allow me to escort you. This disturbance will be dealt with immediately." The title hung in the air. Duchessa. An old inherited title from her mother's side. It was a formality she never used, but one that people like Dubois would never forget. The confirmation delivered with such panicked sincerity was the final nail in Bianca's coffin. Her face a moment ago so triumphant crumpled. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty, terrified shell. Her world of perceived power had just collided with the real thing, and it was annihilating her. Anya looked from Bianca's horrified face to her husband's ashen one. There was no triumph in her heart, only a profound aching sadness for the man he had failed to be. She rose from her chair, her movements fluid and regal. She looked down at Nick, her husband, the stranger sitting amidst the ruins of their life. "I believe," she said, her voice resonating with the chilling finality of a judge's gavel, "this dinner is over." Anya didn't look back. She glided away from the table, Mr. Dubois walking backwards in front of her, clearing a path as if for royalty. The silence in the dining room was absolute, a vacuum where a few moments ago there had been whispers and the clinking of cutlery. Every eye was on her, on the quiet woman in the navy dress who had just detonated a bomb of lineage and power in the heart of New York society. Left behind in the blast radius were Nicholas and Bianca. For a long moment they both remained frozen. Bianca's carefully constructed persona had shattered into a million pieces. The influencer, the socialite, the woman who commanded rooms was now just a girl in a gaudy red dress staring at the empty space where Anya had been. Her mind frantically tried to process the information. Von Hesse, Duchessa, the restaurant owned by her family. Every insult she had hurled, every condescending laugh now replayed in her mind, each one a self-inflicted wound. She hadn't been punching down at a simple middle-class wife. She had been spitting in the face of a god. She turned to Nick, her eyes wide with terror and accusation. "You knew! You had to have known!" Nick couldn't speak. His world had been tilted off its axis. Anya, his simple, sweet librarian-like Anya, of Von Hesse. It was impossible. It was a joke. But the look on Mr. Dubois' face, the hushed awe of the entire restaurant, it was devastatingly real. His entire life with her flashed before his eyes, but now recontextualized. Her small trust fund, her lack of interest in his world of finance, which he'd seen as naivety but was actually supreme indifference, her quiet confidence that he'd mistaken for passivity. The time his startup years ago had miraculously secured a bridge loan from an obscure Swiss bank just when it was about to go under. He had thought it was his own genius. Now he saw the subtle, invisible hand of her family propping him up, testing him. He was a lab rat in a maze he never knew existed, and he had just failed the test in the most spectacular way possible. I didn't know." He finally choked out the words, tasting like poison. And it was the truth. He had been so blinded by his own ambition, so deafened by the cheap applause of people like Bianca, that he had never once bothered to look deeper at the incredible woman right beside him. He had traded gold for glitter, and he was only now realizing the catastrophic scale of his miscalculation. Two security guards dressed in sharp black suits appeared at their table. They were not the restaurant's usual staff. They were something else entirely, their presence exuding a quiet, lethal competence. One of them addressed Bianca, his voice polite but unyielding. "Ms. Cole, you have been asked to leave." Bianca stared at him aghast. "You can't be serious. I'm a guest here." "Not anymore," the guard said flatly. He took a step closer. The message was clear. Leave under your own power or be removed. Humiliated and shaking with a combination of rage and fear, Bianca grabbed her purse, the handbag that had started it all, and fled, her designer heels clicking a frantic, panicked rhythm on the polished floor. The second guard turned to Nick. "Mr. Sheridan, your bill has been taken care of. It is recommended that you also depart." The polite phrasing was a cold dismissal. Numbly, Nick stood up. He walked out of Ethelred's and into the cool night air, but he couldn't breathe. He had walked in feeling like a king on the verge of claiming his new world. He was walking out as less than nothing. He hadn't just lost his wife. He had insulted a dynasty. He had betrayed a power he couldn't even comprehend, and he knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that the consequences were just beginning. Meanwhile, Anya was in a private lounge on the top floor, a room she hadn't been in since she was a child. Mr. Dubois had brought her a glass of sparkling water and was profusely apologizing. "Duchessa, if I had any idea. Your reservation was under Sheridan. We had no way of knowing." "It's fine, Robert," she said, using his first name, the weariness evident in her voice. "It was by my own design." Her phone vibrated. A text from a number she knew by heart but rarely used. It was her grandmother. The message was simple. "Heard there was a scene. The jet is being prepared. Come home, Anya." There was no question, no suggestion. It was a summons. Mr. Dubois had evidently made a call the moment he left the dining room. The Von Hess network was swift and absolute. Anya typed a single word in reply, "Coming." She looked out the window at the glittering expanse of New York City. A city where she had tried to build a small, anonymous life. But her blood, her name would not allow it. She had run from this world of power and privilege only to have the man she loved try to drag her into a cheap imitation version of it. The irony was devastating. A black car, a discreetly armored Maybach, pulled up to the private entrance of the building. Her grandmother's head of security, a formidable man named Stefan, opened the door for her. As she settled into the plush leather seat, Anya placed a hand on her belly. This was no longer just about her and Nick. It was about the future of her child. A child who would be born of Von Hess. A child who deserved better than a coward for a father. The life she had built was gone. The woman she had pretended to be was gone. As the car sped silently toward a private airfield, Anya looked at her reflection in the darkened window. Her eyes were her grandmother's, hard, resolute, and ready for war. The fallout was not immediate, it was worse. It was a slow, systematic strangulation. Nick spent the first 24 hours in a state of frantic denial, bombarding Anya's phone with calls and texts. They all went unanswered. Her number was disconnected by Monday morning. He went to their apartment, but his key no longer worked. A notice on the door from the building management cited a change of ownership and directed all inquiries to a law firm he'd never heard of, Dubois, Lanier & Finch. He looked it up. They were specialists in high asset acquisitions and private wealth management. There were no pictures of the partners online. They were ghosts. Panic began to set in. On Monday at work, he tried to act normal, but the atmosphere at Sterling Nash had changed. Colleagues who usually clapped him on the back now avoided his gaze. His boss, Mr. Harding, called him into his office at noon. "Nick," Harding began, his face grim. "I just got off the phone with our primary underwriters from Geneva. They're pulling their line of credit, effective immediately." Nick felt the blood drain from his face. Why the quarterly projections are stellar. "They wouldn't say," Harding said, not quite meeting his eye. "Just cited a fundamental reassessment of portfolio risk." "Nick, this isn't just one deal. They're pulling out of the entire fund. We're talking about a 9-figure hole in our operating capital. The board is in chaos." Nick knew. He knew with sickening certainty who was behind it. It wasn't a reassessment of risk. It was a command. A quiet phone call from the House of Von Hess was more powerful than any market trend or government regulation. His day got worse. He learned the Sterling Nash partnership he'd been so sure of was being given to someone else. He was being sidelined, isolated. By the end of the day, his access to key accounts had been revoked under the guise of a security review. The social fallout was just as brutal. He tried calling Bianca, hoping for, an ally commiseration. Her phone went straight to voicemail. He checked her social media. Her Instagram, once a vibrant tapestry of flaunted wealth, was gone. Her account had been deleted. A friend of hers he knew from the Hampton circuit told him what happened. Bianca's sponsors had dropped her overnight. Her invitations to every upcoming gala, charity event, and fashion show had been rescinded. She was blacklisted. Rumor had it her landlord was terminating her lease on her penthouse for breach of contract. She had become a social pariah, erased from the world she had tried so desperately to conquer. By Friday, Nick was a ghost in his own life. The empire he thought he was building was revealed to be a house of cards, and someone had just blown it down with a quiet sigh. Desperate, he drove to the offices of Dubois, Lanier and Finch. It was an unassuming brownstone on the Upper East Side, the kind of place you would walk by 1,000 times and never notice. There was no receptionist. An imposing man in a tailored suit greeted him by name and led him to a wood-paneled conference room. He was offered water. He waited for an hour. Finally, a woman entered. She was in her late 70s, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, her silver hair styled in an elegant chignon. Her eyes were a piercing, intelligent blue, Anya's eyes. There was no mistaking the regal bearing, the aura of absolute, unshakable power. This was Genevieve von Hesse, the matriarch. She didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table, regarding him not with anger but with the mild, detached curiosity of a scientist studying an insect. "Mr. Sheridan," she said, her voice a low-cultured contralto with a faint European accent. "You have been remarkably persistent. I have granted you 5 minutes." "Where is Anya?" Nick blurted out, his voice cracking. "I need to talk to her. I need to apologize." Genevieve's expression didn't change. "That will not be possible. Anya is where she belongs with her family. As for your apology, I am curious. What precisely are you sorry for? The infidelity? The public humiliation? Or are you simply sorry you were caught?" "I love her." Nick insisted, the word sounding hollow even to his own ears. "I made a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake." "You are correct on one count," Genevieve said coolly. "It was stupid. But it was not a mistake. A mistake is an error in judgment. What you displayed was a catastrophic failure of character. We are, Mr. Sheridan, very thorough. When Anya chose you against my strenuous advice, we investigated you. You were ambitious, intelligent, with no family ties to complicate matters. You seemed adequate." She began to pace slowly, her presence filling the room. "So we decided to give you a chance, to see if you were worthy of my granddaughter's love. We observed. Your little startup that was about to fail, a capital infusion from one of our holding companies, saved it. That impossible deal you closed at your first job, the one that made your career, we facilitated it, your entire ascent. Mr. Sheridan, the career you are so proud of was a carefully curated test. We gave you the tools, the opportunities, the tailwind, all to see what kind of man you would become." Nick stared at her, horrified. His entire professional life had been a lie, a fabrication. "We wanted to see if you would value the woman who loved you, or if you would be seduced by the cheap trappings of wealth you chased." Genevieve continued, her voice turning to ice. "You chose the latter. You took her love, her loyalty, her belief in you, and you threw it away for a vacuous creature in a red dress and the fleeting approval of insignificant people. You did not just betray your wife, Mr. Sheridan, you betrayed our investment in you." She paused in front of him, her gaze pinning him to his chair. "You have failed the test. The experiment is over. Our support has been withdrawn. Sterling Nash will collapse within the month. Your career in finance, not just in New York but globally, is finished. You have been rendered irrelevant." The finality of her words was absolute. This wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. "Please," he begged, his pride shattered. "Just let me see her. Let me tell her I'm sorry." Genevieve actually smiled, then a cold, terrifying sight. "An apology is a request for forgiveness. Forgiveness is earned. You have nothing left to offer. You are nothing. My granddaughter is carrying the next von Hesse heir. Her only concern now is the health of that child and removing all sources of toxicity from her life. That Mr. Sheridan is you." She turned and walked to the door. "Your 5 minutes are up. Stefan will show you out." The imposing man from the lobby appeared. Nick didn't move. He was broken. He had flown so high, so close to the sun, not realizing his wings were never his own. And now he was falling back to an earth that would no longer have him. He had lost everything, all because he had never truly seen the woman who had given him the world. While Nick's world was being systematically dismantled, Anya's was being rebuilt, fortified by the very heritage she had tried to escape. The von Hesse ancestral estate wasn't a house. It was a small, sovereign state nestled in the Swiss Alps, overlooking the pristine waters of Lake Geneva. It was a place of quiet, formidable beauty where centuries of power had soaked into the very stone of the castle walls. The first few weeks were a blur of sleep, gentle walks through manicured gardens and quiet conversations with her grandmother. Genevieve did not press, did not say, "I told you so." She simply provided a sanctuary, a space for Anya to grieve the death of her marriage and the life she had tried to build. "He was my choice," Anya said one afternoon, sitting with Genevieve on a terrace that offered a panoramic view of the mountains. "My mistake." "He was your hope," Genevieve corrected gently, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "You hoped the world could be simple. You hoped a man could love you for your heart alone, untainted by the knowledge of your name. It is a noble hope, my dear. But our world is rarely so simple. Power is a current. It pulls everything toward it. You cannot pretend it isn't there." Anya placed a hand on her growing belly. "What do I tell this child about his father?" "You will tell him the truth when he is old enough to understand it," Genevieve said. "You will tell him his father was a man who was given a great gift and did not know how to treasure it. And you will teach him to be better. You will teach him that true strength is not in ambition, but in character. Not in what you acquire, but in what you protect." Yet, the fortress was not just physical, it was emotional and psychological. Anya began to reconnect with the person she was before she became Anya Sheridan. She spent hours in the family's private art gallery, a collection rivaling the Louvre, rediscovering the passion she had relegated to a hobby. She sat in on financial briefings with her grandmother, her mind sharper than she had given it credit for, easily grasping the complex webs of global economics. The skills she had suppressed for years, the fluency in 4 languages, the intuitive understanding of geopolitics, the keen eye for a forged masterpiece, or a flawed business plan, all came flooding back. She was not just a woman recovering from heartbreak. She was an heiress reclaiming her throne. One day a package arrived. It was from a law firm representing Bianca Cole. Inside was a groveling multi-page letter of apology and a check for an obscene amount of money described as a token of her profound remorse. Bianca was clearly terrified, trying to buy her way out of the social and financial exile she had been cast into. Anya looked at the check and laughed, a genuine liberating sound. She took a pen and wrote "insufficient" across the memo line in bold letters. She then instructed her aide to return it not to Bianca's lawyers but to Bianca's last known address, a cramped apartment in a down-market neighborhood where she was rumored to be living with her parents. She would not be bought. The damage Bianca had done couldn't be quantified in currency. Her punishment was not to be a financial penalty, but to live with the consequences of her own actions, stripped of the status she so desperately craved. A letter also arrived from Nick. It was not sent through lawyers but through a distant cousin. He must have tracked down a desperate last-ditch attempt to bypass Genevieve's firewall. It was a handwritten, tear-stained plea. He wrote of his regret, his stupidity, his love for her. He begged for one more chance to be a father to their child. Anya read the letter, and for a moment the old ache returned. The memory of the man she had loved, the man in the university library, flickered in her mind. But it was like remembering a character from a book. He wasn't real anymore. The man who had sat silently while she was humiliated was real. The man who had chased glitter and fame was real. She walked to the ornate fireplace in the grand library. She held the letter over the flames, watching as the paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. It was not an act of anger, but of release. She was letting go of the ghost of Nicholas Sheridan. Her child would have a legacy. He would have the strength of the Von Hess name, the protection of their empire, and a mother who had learned the hard way that you could not build a life on a foundation of secrets. Her son would know who he was from the moment he was born, and he would be taught that the Von Hess crest on his ring, the falcon, and the key was not a symbol of privilege, but of responsibility. A responsibility his father had failed to understand. Anya was no longer hiding. She was home. 6 months later, Anya stood in the boardroom on the top floor of the Von Hess global headquarters in Zurich. The room was a marvel of minimalist design with a single sheet of smart glass for a wall, offering a breathtaking view of the city below. Dressed in a bespoke power suit that elegantly accommodated her 8-month pregnancy, she commanded the attention of the 12 men and women seated around the polished obsidian table. These were the heads of the family's various global divisions: banking, mining, technology, art, acquisition. They were the most powerful executives in the world, and they were all listening to her. She had just finished a 40-minute presentation delivered flawlessly from memory, outlining a new philanthropic initiative, the creation of a global fund to support emerging artists and preserve cultural artifacts in conflict zones. It was her passion: art history, now scaled to the global stage, backed by the full financial might of the Von Hess fortune. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, and then the head of the banking division, a stern German named Kyle, gave a single respectful nod. A brilliant strategy, Duchessa. Bold and with significant potential for long-term cultural return. My division fully supports it. One by one, the others echoed their assent. Anya felt a surge of pride, not in her name, but in her own ability. She had earned their respect not through birthright, but through competence. After the meeting, Genevieve, who had been observing silently from the end of the table, approached her. "Your father would have been proud," she said, her eyes gleaming. "You have his vision but your mother's heart. It is a formidable combination." "I learned from the best," Anya replied, smiling at her grandmother. As they walked toward the private elevator, Genevieve's aide discreetly handed her a tablet. Genevieve glanced at it, her expression unreadable. "A final piece of news regarding Mr. Sheridan," she said conversationally. Anya's posture stiffened slightly, but she kept her voice even. "Oh, after being unable to find work in any related field, he has apparently accepted a position as a regional manager for a mid-level retail chain in Ohio. It seems he sold his expensive watches to afford the deposit on a small apartment." Genevieve paused. "He has also formally relinquished all parental rights to the child in exchange for a binding agreement that we will not interfere further in his life. He has, it appears, accepted his irrelevance." Anya absorbed the news. There was no joy, no triumphant satisfaction. There was only a quiet, melancholy pity for the man who had thrown everything away. He had gotten what he wanted in a way. A simple, anonymous life, the one she had once craved. "That is for the best," Anya said finally. It was a clean break, a necessary amputation. Her child would be raised free from the shadow of that weakness. Back at the estate that evening, Anya stood on her balcony, the cool alpine air crisp against her skin. She looked down at the simple gold signet ring on her finger, the engraved crest hidden from view. For years she had seen it as a burden, a symbol of a life she didn't want. Now she saw it for what it was, a legacy, a tool, a responsibility. She had tried to live a small life hidden from the world. But the world had found her. The heartbreak had been a crucible burning away the girl she was and forging the woman she was meant to be. She was no longer just a wife or a mother-to-be. She was a Von Hess, a Duchessa, a force of nature in her own right. She felt a powerful kick from within her womb, a little life eager to join the world. "Soon?" she whispered, a hand on her belly. "Soon, my love. And I will show you everything. We will build a better world, you and I." She was not defined by the man who had betrayed her, but by the strength she had found in his wake. Her story was not one of a wife scorned, but of a queen reclaiming her crown. And her dynasty was just beginning. Anya's story is a powerful reminder that true worth is never determined by someone else's opinion. It's a fire that burns within a hidden strength that can emerge from the ashes of betrayal and heartbreak. She was forced to lose a life she thought she wanted only to reclaim the incredible power she was always meant to wield. Her journey from a quiet, unassuming wife to a formidable global leader shows that sometimes the most painful endings are just the beginning of our greatest chapters. If you were moved by Anya's journey of resilience and reclamation, please take a moment to hit that like button to show your support. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And for more tales of dramatic turns and ultimate triumph, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. In the comments below, let us know. What do you think was the most satisfying moment of Anya's revenge? We can't wait to hear from you.
In the sterile silence of a hospital room, broken only by the frantic beeping of a heart monitor, a woman was fighting for two lives, her own and that of her unborn child. Miles away, the man who had promised to cherish her stood beside his lover, their shared laughter a cruel counterpoint to her desperate gasps for air. They believed she was broken, a tragic chapter they could simply close and forget. They were wrong. 5 years later, at the reading of a will that would decide the fate of a century-old dynasty, the doors to the grand library swung open. And when everyone saw who stood there, poised and powerful, the laughter died forever. This is the story of how a shattered wife returned from the ashes not just to reclaim her life, but to seize the very empire that had tried to crush her. Blackwood Manor was less a house and more a kingdom carved from Cotswold stone and sprawling green acres. Its history was written in the ivy that scaled its walls and the ancient oaks that stood like sentinels on its lawns. For Evelyn Hayes, marrying Alistair Vance meant becoming the reluctant chatelaine of this formidable estate. She had fallen for Alistair, the charming, ambitious heir, with eyes the colour of a stormy sea, not for the suffocating legacy that came with him. In the beginning, their life had the polished veneer of a fairy tale. He would bring her wildflowers from the meadow and whisper promises against her skin in the vast canopied bed that had belonged to generations of Vance brides. But the gilding on their cage began to flake away, revealing the cold iron beneath. Alistair's affection became conditional, his presence fleeting. His work as a high-level acquisitions manager for the family's global corporation, Vance Industries, became an all-consuming excuse. Dinners grew silent, the cavernous dining hall echoing with the clinking of silverware against porcelain, the space between them as wet and cold as the marble floor. Evelyn, now 6 months pregnant with their first child, a daughter they had decided to name Lily, found herself increasingly isolated. The staff were polite, but distant loyal to the Vance name, not to the outsider who carried its next heir. The true power at Blackwood Manor was not Alistair, but his grandmother, Beatrice Vance. At 84, she was a formidable matriarch, with a mind as sharp as the diamond brooches she favoured, and a gaze that could dissect a person's intentions in a single, sweeping glance. Beatrice ruled the family and its fortune with an iron will forged in an era that valued legacy above all else. She treated Evelyn with a cool, observational civility, her approval a prize Evelyn felt she was constantly failing to win. "A Vance heir requires a strong mother," Beatrice had said one afternoon, over tea, her voice as crisp as old parchment. Sentiment is a luxury. Resilience is a necessity. Evelyn had merely nodded her hand, resting protectively on her swelling abdomen, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. The first time Evelyn heard the name Scarlett Dubois, it was a whisper on a phone call Alistair thought she couldn't overhear. He had stepped out onto the terrace, his voice low and intimate, a tone he hadn't used with Evelyn in months. Scarlett, he explained later, with practiced ease, was a brilliant new consultant from the Paris office, essential to a hostile takeover he was engineering. She was aggressive, sharp, a real asset. He spoke of her with a fire in his eyes that Evelyn realized with a sickening lurch in her stomach was not professional admiration. Soon Scarlett was no longer just a name. She was a presence, an invisible spectre haunting the halls of Evelyn's home. She was the lingering scent of a strange, expensive perfume on Alistair's suit jackets, the late-night text messages that made him smile privately at his phone, the urgent business dinners that stretched into the early hours of the morning. Evelyn tried to deny it, to rationalize it as the paranoia of a pregnant woman whose hormones were in revolt. She wanted to believe in the man she had married, in the life they were supposed to build. She threw herself into preparing the nursery, a sun-drenched room overlooking the rose garden, filling it with soft lamb's wool blankets and hand-painted storybooks. This child, her Lily, would be the anchor to fix their drifting marriage. She would make everything right again. The illusion was irrevocably shattered during the annual Vance Foundation Gala, a lavish affair held in a grand marquee on the manor grounds. Evelyn, feeling large and clumsy in her bespoke maternity gown, watched Alistair across the crowded room. He was standing with a striking woman, whose crimson dress seemed poured onto her statuesque frame. Her hair was a cascade of fiery red curls, and her laughter was loud and unrestrained. It was Scarlett Dubois. Evelyn felt it in her bones. Alistair hadn't even introduced them. He had maneuvered through the evening to keep them apart. But now, as Evelyn watched from the shadows, she saw Scarlett place a perfectly manicured hand on Alistair's chest, her touch lingering far too long to be professional. She leaned in and whispered something in his ear, and Alistair's response was a deep, rumbling laugh, a genuine, unguarded laugh that Evelyn hadn't heard directed at her in over a year. The sight was a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs, and the floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. At that moment, Beatrice Vance appeared at her side, her presence silent and sudden. She didn't look at Evelyn. Her gaze was fixed like a hawk's on her grandson. Some men. Beatrice said, her voice low and laced with something that sounded like contempt. Mistake a shiny bauble for a crown jewel. They are fools, and they create dynasties of fools. It was the closest thing to an admission of the truth and a strange, cold comfort. Evelyn wasn't just being paranoid. The matriarch of Blackwood Manor saw it too. But seeing it and stopping it were two different things. Later that night, when Alistair finally came to bed, smelling of champagne and Scarlett's perfume, he found Evelyn awake, staring at the ceiling. "Who is she, Alistair?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't feign ignorance. He sighed, the sound heavy with annoyance, not remorse. "Evelyn, please, don't do this. You're being emotional. It's the pregnancy. Don't you dare use our child as an excuse for your betrayal," she shot back. Sitting up, her heart pounding with a mixture of rage and terror. "There is no betrayal," he said, his voice turning to ice. "Scarlett is a colleague. My focus right now is on securing the firm's future for us, for this family, for our child. You are being hysterical, and frankly, it's unattractive." The word unattractive landed like a slap. He turned his back to her, a clear dismissal, and within minutes he was breathing the even breaths of sleep. Evelyn lay there wide awake in the opulent darkness, a prisoner in her gilded cage, while the ghost of a woman in a crimson dress danced in the ruins of her marriage. The fight for her future hadn't even begun, but she had already sustained her first and most painful wound. The weeks that followed the gala were a slow, agonizing descent into a waking nightmare. Alistair's gaslighting became an art form. Every suspicion Evelyn voiced was twisted into a symptom of her delicate condition. Her valid fears were labeled as hormonal insecurities, her loneliness as neediness. He made her feel as though she were losing her mind, that the truth she saw so clearly was a fiction spun from anxiety. Scarlett, emboldened, grew more audacious. She began calling the manor's landline, her voice a syrupy purr, asking for Alistair under the guise of urgent work matters. Once a courier delivered a package for Alistair, a bespoke suit from a Savile Row tailor. Tucked inside the breast pocket was a small embossed card. Evelyn's hands shook as she read the inscription, "Can't wait to see you out of this one. All my love, S." When Evelyn confronted Alistair holding the card like a piece of radioactive evidence, he flew into a rage. He accused her of violating his privacy of being a snooping, untrusting wife. He snatched the card, tore it into tiny pieces, and told her it was a tasteless joke from a colleague. "You are letting this obsession ruin us, Evelyn," he yelled, his face contorted with a fury she had never seen before. "You should be focused on the baby, on your health. Instead, you're manufacturing drama, where there is none." He stormed out, leaving Evelyn standing amidst the confetti of her shredded proof, her heart a block of ice in her chest. The stress began to manifest physically. Her blood pressure, which had been perfect throughout her pregnancy, started to creep dangerously high. Her doctor, a placid man named Dr. Albright, advised bed rest and stress reduction. "The health of your baby depends on your well-being," Mrs. Vance, he'd said kindly, unaware that her well-being was being systematically dismantled within the very walls meant to protect her. Evelyn tried. She spent her days in the nursery reading to the baby in her womb, trying to create a bubble of peace in the suffocating atmosphere of the manor. But the peace was always shattered. One afternoon, while resting in the garden, she overheard two of the younger maids gossiping by the fountain. He bought her a car. One whispered her voice a mix of awe and scandal. A brand new Aston Martin. Silver. "Mr. Davies, the driver, told me. Said he saw them in the city and she was all over him." "Shameless," the other replied. "And his wife so close to her time. Poor thing." They fell silent as they saw Evelyn, their faces flushing with guilt. Evelyn simply stood up and walked back into the house, their words chasing her like hornets. An Aston Martin. While she was on mandatory bed rest, he was buying another woman a luxury car. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it stole her breath. Her only strange solace was Beatrice. The old woman would summon Evelyn to her private sitting room, a space filled with the scent of dried roses and old books. They never spoke of Alistair's affair directly, but Beatrice's conversation was pointed. She spoke of her own husband, a man known for his philandering ways. Grandfather Vance was a charming man, with a weak spine. Beatrice said one day, her fingers stroking a porcelain figurine. He believed his name gave him license to behave without honor. It is a flaw that I regret has trickled down through the generations. Power does not grant immunity from consequences, Evelyn. It merely delays them. Remember that. It was during these meetings that Beatrice would inquire with sharp precision about Evelyn's health, the baby's development, and even her financial literacy. She'd ask pointed questions about the prenuptial agreement Evelyn had signed without much thought. Did you have your own solicitor review it, or did you simply trust the one Alistair provided? Beatrice asked, her eyes sharp over the rim of her teacup. I trusted the family's solicitor. Evelyn admitted feeling a flush of shame at her own naivety. Beatrice made a small, dismissive sound. Of course you did. You were in love. Love is a notoriously poor business partner. The days bled into one another, each one heavier than the last. Evelyn felt like a ghost haunting her own life. The culmination of this psychological warfare occurred a week before her due date. Alistair announced he had to fly to Zurich for an emergency 2-day conference. The timing was terrible, and Evelyn begged him not to go. What if I go into labor? She pleaded, her hands clutching his arm. You won't, he said, gently prying her fingers away. Dr. Albright said, You're not showing any signs. And Scarlett has organized the entire summit. My absence would collapse a multi-billion-dollar deal. This is for our future, Evelyn. For Lily's future. He used their daughter's name like a shield, a weapon to quell her dissent. He left the next morning, leaving Evelyn with a perfunctory kiss on the forehead. That evening, a sudden blinding headache seized Evelyn. White spots danced in her vision, and a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. She called for the housekeeper, her voice a panicked whisper. Within an hour, she was in an ambulance, the siren wailing as it raced through the quiet country lanes toward the hospital. The diagnosis was swift and terrifying, severe preeclampsia. Her blood pressure was skyrocketing to levels that could induce a stroke. It was a life-threatening emergency for both her and the baby. They needed to perform an emergency C-section immediately. As the nurses prepped her for surgery, their faces grim, a wave of terror washed over Evelyn. She was alone. She needed Alistair. A nurse, a kind woman named Mary, took her phone to call him. His phone is going straight to voicemail. Dear, Mary said, her brow furrowed with concern. Is there another number? Evelyn remembered the number for the hotel in Zurich he had left on the kitchen counter. She recited it from memory, her teeth chattering. Mary dialed, putting the phone on speaker so Evelyn could hear. It rang once, twice, then a voice answered. It wasn't Alistair. It was Scarlett. Hello, Scarlett's voice was husky, thick with sleep and annoyance. I need to speak to Alistair Vance. It's an emergency, the nurse said, her tone clipped and professional. There was a rustling sound, then Scarlett's voice, muffled but clear, speaking away from the phone. Alistair, darling, it's for you. Some hospital emergency. There was a pause, and then Evelyn heard it, a sound that would be seared into her memory for the rest of her life. Scarlett laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a low, throaty, dismissive laugh, full of smug satisfaction. It was the laugh of a woman lying in a man's bed in a Zurich hotel. A woman who had won. The sound sliced through Evelyn's pain-filled haze clearer than any surgeon's scalpel. In that single cruel sound, she heard the entire truth of her marriage. There was no conference. There was no multi-billion-dollar deal. There was only this, a sordid, cheap affair, for which she and her unborn child were now paying the ultimate price. Alistair's voice finally came on the line, irritated. What is it, Mr. Vance, your wife is being taken into emergency surgery? The nurse said sternly. She has severe preeclampsia. It's critical. There was a beat of silence. Then, all right. I'll I'll get the first flight I can." He sounded distant, inconvenienced, but Evelyn barely heard him. All she could hear was the echo of that laugh. As the nurses wheeled her gurney towards the operating theatre, the bright overhead lights blurring into streaks, the porcelain facade of her life didn't just crack. It exploded into 1,000,000 razor-sharp pieces. The pain in her heart was now infinitely greater than the pain in her body. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting against the memory of that laugh. The operating theatre was a world of blinding white light and the sharp, clean scent of antiseptic. Faces in blue masks floated above Evelyn, their voices a low, urgent murmur that seemed to come from a great distance. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was a frantic drumbeat counting down the seconds of her life and of Lily's. An anesthesiologist spoke to her in a calm, soothing voice, explaining the spinal block. But the words were a meaningless buzz against the roar in her ears. The roar of betrayal, the echo of Scarlett's laugh. As the numbness spread through the lower half of her body, a strange detachment set in. She was a spectator to her own crisis. She felt a pulling of pressure, but no pain. Her thoughts, however, were excruciatingly clear. She saw Alistair's face when he lied to her, the smug curl of Scarlett's lip at the gala, the torn pieces of the note from the tailor. Each memory was a shard of glass twisting in her soul. He wasn't on his way. He wasn't rushing to her side. He was in bed with another woman, annoyed that his wife's potential death was interrupting his tryst. "Her pressure is dropping too fast," a voice shouted. "We're losing her." Another one echoed. The calm efficiency of the room fractured into controlled chaos. Evelyn's vision began to tunnel the bright lights dimming at the edges. She felt herself drifting, a sense of profound, weary surrender washing over her. It would be so easy to just let go, to slip away from the pain, from the humiliation, from a life that had become a prison of lies. But then, through the fog, she heard a new sound, a thin, reedy cry. It was the cry of a newborn, fragile but furious, piercing the clinical din of the room. It was Lily. "You have a daughter?" "Evelyn," a nurse said, her voice thick with emotion, her face appearing close to Evelyn's. "She's tiny, but she's a fighter." The sound of Lily's cry was an anchor, pulling Evelyn back from the abyss. A fighter. That one word ignited a spark in the cold, dead ashes of her heart. I have to be a fighter too, for this tiny, helpless person who was depending solely on her. The weariness receded, replaced by a primal, ferocious will to live. She fought to keep her eyes open, fought to breathe, fought to hold on. Lily was whisked away to the neonatal intensive care unit, too premature and fragile to stay with her mother. Evelyn was moved to recovery, her own condition still precarious. For the next 48 hours, she drifted in and out of consciousness, her body waging a silent war against the toxins of the pre-eclampsia. Alistair arrived late the next afternoon. He did not look like a man who had rushed from a business trip. He was impeccably dressed, his hair perfectly coiffed. He carried a bouquet of overpriced hospital gift shop roses. He looked tired, yes, but it was the tiredness of a man whose sleep had been interrupted, not a husband who had spent the night terrified for his wife and child. He sat by her bedside, taking her hand in a grip that felt performative. "Evelyn, my God, you gave us all a scare." The word "us" was a lie so profound it was almost absurd. There was no us. There was him and Scarlett, and then there was her and Lily. I heard her, Evelyn whispered, her voice a dry rasp. I heard Scarlett laugh. Alistair's face tightened. He dropped her hand. You were hallucinating, delirious. The drugs, the stress. Evelyn, now is not the time for this. You need to rest, to recover. It was real, she insisted, finding a sliver of strength. I heard her. You were in bed with her when your child was about to be born. That's enough. He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. He glanced at the door, terrified of being overheard. You are going to rest, and you are going to drop this paranoid fantasy. I came as soon as I could. I was in meetings. My phone was off. End of story. He was not just a liar. He was a coward. He couldn't even face the truth when she was lying helpless in a hospital bed. He stayed for another 20 minutes, making a show of talking to the nurses before announcing he had to go back to the manor to make some arrangements. He didn't even ask in detail about Lily. The true visitor of consequence arrived the following day. It was Beatrice Vance. She didn't bring flowers. She entered the room with the quiet authority of a visiting monarch, dismissing the attending nurse with a slight nod. She pulled a chair to Evelyn's bedside and sat her back ramrod straight. For a long moment, she simply studied Evelyn, her gaze intense and unreadable. I spoke with the charge nurse. Beatrice began, her voice devoid of sentiment. She told me about the phone call to Zurich. She is a discreet woman, but she answered my questions honestly when I assured her it was a matter of family importance. Evelyn felt a tear slide down her temple and into her hair. She didn't have the strength to wipe it away. So you know, Evelyn whispered. I know that my grandson is a fool of the highest order, a disgrace to the name he bears. Beatrice said, her voice as cold and hard as granite. He has proven himself to be not just a faithless husband, but a man devoid of basic human decency. That is an unforgivable failing. She leaned forward slightly. But this is not about him anymore. This is about you, and about the child, my great-granddaughter. The doctors say you will both recover, that you are both, in their words, fighters. She paused, letting the word hang in the air, just as it had in the operating room. I have always believed that the Vance legacy is not one of wealth, but of strength, a strength my son lacked, and my grandson has spat upon. I have been watching you, Evelyn. I saw your quiet dignity in the face of his infidelity. I see your fight now. And I have made a decision. Beatrice's eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of something new, a strategic fire. Alistair believes that once you are well, you will return to Blackwood, play the part of the forgiving wife, and raise his heir, while he continues his sordid little life. He believes you are weak. He believes his position is secure. I want you to let him believe that. For now. Evelyn stared at her confused. What are you saying? I am saying that the longest night of your life is over, Beatrice stated. And a new day is dawning, a day of reckoning. Alistair and that vulgar creature have made a powerful enemy, Evelyn, not just in you, but in me. And I do not lose. Beatrice stood, her movements precise. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a simple, unadorned business card. This is Arthur Abernathy. He has been my personal solicitor for 40 years. He is loyal to me, not to the family, not to the firm. When you are discharged, you will not be returning to Blackwood Manor. A cottage has been prepared for you and the child on the far side of the estate, a place where you will not be disturbed. You will call Mr. Abernathy. You will follow his instructions to the letter. You will disappear from Alistair's life, and you will focus on two things: raising your daughter and preparing for the war to come. With that, she turned and left as quietly as she had arrived, leaving the business card on the bedside table. Evelyn stared at it, the name embossed in stark black ink. Arthur Abernathy, solicitor. It was more than a card. It was a lifeline. It was a weapon. The longest night was indeed over. The pain, the fear, the betrayal, they were still there. But they were no longer just wounds. They were fuel. As she lay in the quiet hospital room, listening to the steady, reassuring beep of the monitor, Evelyn made a vow. They had laughed while she fought for her life. One day she would have the entire Vance empire, and they would have nothing. The thought didn't bring her joy. It brought her a cold, clear, and unshakable sense of purpose. The fight for Lily's life was won. The fight for their future was just beginning. Alistair accepted Evelyn's decision to move into the estate's old gardener's cottage with surprising ease. He saw it as a victory. In his narrative, Evelyn had suffered a mild postpartum breakdown, a fit of paranoia that required her to have space. The cottage, secluded and miles from the main house, was the perfect solution. It kept her on the property, preserving the veneer of their marriage for society, but effectively removed her from his daily life. It allowed him to install Scarlett Dubois at Blackwood Manor first as a live-in consultant, and then quite brazenly as its unofficial mistress. He thought he was managing a delicate situation with cunning. In reality, he was walking into a meticulously laid trap. The gardener's cottage, renamed Hawthorne Cottage, was no humble shack. Under Beatrice's direction, it had been quietly and luxuriously renovated. It was a sanctuary. Here, hidden from the prying eyes of the main house, Evelyn began the slow process of healing her body and forging her spirit into steel. The first few months were a blur of feeding schedules, sleepless nights, and overwhelming love for the tiny, fragile creature who depended on her for everything. Lily, though born prematurely, was indeed a fighter. She grew stronger each day, her grip tightening around Evelyn's finger. Her blue eyes, Vance eyes, watching her mother with a solemn intensity. This quiet, isolated life was Evelyn's chrysalis. Once a week, a black car would pull up the hidden drive, and Arthur Abernathy would step out. He was a tall, stoic man in his late 60s with kind eyes and a mind like a steel trap. He was Beatrice's most trusted confidant, the architect of her formidable legal and financial fortress. He became Evelyn's teacher. He brought her books, not novels, but texts on contract law, corporate finance, and estate planning. He would sit with her for hours at the small kitchen table while Lily slept in her bassinet nearby, explaining the intricate web of trusts, holding companies, and offshore accounts that constituted the Vance fortune. Beatrice was no fool, Abernathy explained during one of their first sessions. She saw the weakness in her son, and she saw it magnified in Alistair. For decades, she has been restructuring her assets, moving the real power away from the direct lineage and into a series of discretionary trusts. Legally, Alistair owns very little outright. He has a generous allowance and the illusion of control, but the true ownership, the heart of the empire, rests in a master trust. A trust for which Beatrice is the sole trustee. Evelyn listened, absorbing every word. She learned that the prenuptial agreement she signed was largely irrelevant, as it only pertained to Alistair's personal assets, which were negligible. The real prize was the master trust. And who is the beneficiary of this trust? Evelyn asked. Currently, it is designated for her direct, legitimate descendants, Abernathy said. Upon her death, control was to pass to Alistair, was being the operative word. Under Beatrice's instruction, Evelyn began her transformation. Abernathy arranged for tutors. A formidable woman named Mrs. Davies, who had once coached CEOs on public speaking, taught Evelyn elocution and presence. She learned to modulate her voice to stand with unshakable poise, to command a room with her stillness. A retired financial analyst from Goldman Sachs taught her how to read a balance sheet, how to spot a hostile takeover, how to understand the ebb and flow of global markets. She became a student of her own life, analyzing her past with cold objectivity. She saw how her desire to be loved had made her blind, how her trust had been a vulnerability Alistair had exploited. The pain of that betrayal never truly vanished, but she learned to transmute it. Grief became focus. Anger became ambition. Meanwhile, at the great house, Alistair and Scarlett were living a life of gaudy excess. They threw lavish parties, redecorated rooms in opulent, tasteless styles, and spent money with a desperation that bespoke their insecurity. They were playing house in a kingdom they did not understand, believing it was theirs by right. To them, Evelyn was a ghost, a half-mad recluse living in a cottage in the woods. They would occasionally see her from a distance, walking with Lily in the gardens, and they would pity her. Their pity was their greatest mistake. Evelyn maintained a single link to the manor Beatrice. Once a month, she would take Lily to visit her great-grandmother. These visits were quiet, formal affairs. Beatrice never displayed overt affection, but Evelyn would see her watching Lily with a profound, assessing gaze. She saw in the child the unbroken line of the Vance legacy, a future she could salvage from the wreckage of her grandson's failings. During one visit when Lily was almost 3, Beatrice gave Evelyn a heavy iron key. "This is for the lockbox in my solicitor's office," she said. "It contains the original charter for Vance Industries and my final amended last will and testament. Arthur has the other key. It requires both to open it. When the time comes, you will know what to do." 5 years passed in this manner. 5 years of distant, relentless preparation. Lily grew from a fragile infant into a bright, curious little girl, with her mother's gentle heart and her great-grandmother's sharp eyes. Evelyn transformed from a broken wife into a woman of formidable intellect and quiet confidence. She understood the Vance Empire better than Alistair ever would, because she had studied its foundations while he was merely admiring its gilded facade. Then one cool autumn morning, the call came from Mr. Abernathy. Beatrice Vance had passed away peacefully in her sleep. The news was expected, yet it struck Evelyn with a deep and genuine sorrow. The formidable matriarch had been her unlikely savior, the architect of her resurrection. The funeral was a grand, somber affair, drawing financial titans and society figures from across the globe. Evelyn attended with Lily holding her hand. She stood at the back of the ancient church, a quiet, elegant figure in black. Alistair and Scarlett stood at the front, playing the part of chief mourners. Scarlett, draped in black couture and a ridiculously oversized hat, dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Alistair gave a eulogy full of hollow platitudes about his grandmother's wisdom and legacy words that turned to ash in Evelyn's mouth. After the service, as they stood in the graveyard, Scarlett approached Evelyn for the first time in 5 years. "Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Beatrice was quite a woman." She glanced down at Lily. Alistair and I do hope that now you will feel you can move on. Find a new life for yourself. We would, of course, provide a generous settlement to see you and the child are comfortable. It was an offer of a payoff, a dismissal. They were trying to buy her off, to finally sweep her out of the picture so they could claim their prize. Evelyn looked directly into Scarlett's eyes, her gaze as cold and clear as a winter sky. "That won't be necessary," she said, her voice calm and level. "I'm quite comfortable where I am." She turned and walked away, leaving Scarlett momentarily speechless, a flicker of unease in her eyes. The ghost she had tried to dismiss had just spoken, and her voice held no fear. The game was about to begin. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Tuesday in the library of Blackwood Manor. The library at Blackwood Manor was the heart of the house, a 2-story cathedral of dark mahogany and leather-bound books that smelled of history and power. A colossal fireplace dominated one wall, its stone mantel carved with the Vance family crest, a hawk clutching a key. It was a room designed for pronouncements for the sealing of fates, and on this grey Tuesday afternoon, the air within it was thick with anticipation. Alistair sat at the head of the long polished table, the position he had long coveted. He looked every bit the new patriarch, dressed in a sombre but impeccably tailored suit. Beside him, Scarlett was a study in predatory stillness. Her mourning attire had been replaced by a sharp, jewel-toned dress that was both expensive and entirely inappropriate for the occasion. She surveyed the room with the proprietary air of a conqueror, her eyes lingering on the priceless paintings and antique furniture mentally redecorating her kingdom. A few distant cousins summoned from the woodwork by the scent of inheritance sat scattered around the table, their expressions a mixture of greed and feigned grief. They were the pawns on the board, irrelevant to the main game. Arthur Abernathy sat at the opposite end of the table, a worn leather briefcase at his side. He adjusted his spectacles, his face an impassive mask that betrayed none of the impending cataclysm. He was waiting. "Well, Arthur." "Shall we begin?" Alistair said, his tone impatient. "I have a board meeting in the city at 4. He was projecting an image of a man already burdened by the weight of his new responsibilities. "We are waiting for one more person," Abernathy replied calmly, his eyes fixed on the grand double doors of the library. Alistair frowned. "Who all the beneficiaries have been notified. It's just family." "Indeed," Abernathy said. Just then the doors swung open. Every head turned. For a moment, there was a collective stunned silence. It was Evelyn, but it was not the Evelyn they remembered. The timid, heartbroken woman who had hidden herself away in a cottage was gone. In her place stood a figure of breathtaking poise and elegance. She wore a simple but exquisitely cut navy blue dress that bespoke quiet wealth, not flashy excess. Her hair was styled in a chic, sophisticated cut, and her face, free of the sorrow that had once clouded it, was serene and confident. Her eyes, clear and direct, held no trace of fear or pain. They held only purpose. Beside her, holding her hand, was Lily, a beautiful, solemn-faced 5-year-old, in a velvet dress, her gaze a miniature echo of her mother's intensity. The click of Evelyn's heels on the marble inlay was the only sound in the cavernous room. She walked not with the hesitation of an outcast, but with the measured, confident stride of someone who belonged there. Scarlett was the first to recover a sneer twisting her lips. "Evelyn, what a surprise. I didn't realize you were invited to the main reading. I thought Arthur would arrange a private summary for you. The insult was clear. You are not one of us." Evelyn didn't even glance at her. Her focus was entirely on Abernathy. She gave him a slight, respectful nod. "Mr. Abernathy, I trust we are ready to proceed." Alistair stared, momentarily dumbfounded by her transformation. He saw not the broken wife he had pitied, but a stranger, a beautiful, formidable stranger, a flicker of an old, forgotten attraction, mixed with a new, unsettling sense of alarm. "Evelyn, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "This is a private family matter." "I am family, Alistair," she replied, her voice cool and even. "I am the mother of Beatrice's only great-grandchild." She took a seat at the table directly opposite him, placing Lily in the chair beside her. The symmetry was perfect, the failed heir and his mistress on one side, the disavowed wife and the true bloodline on the other. The battle lines were drawn. Abernathy cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the tension. He opened his briefcase and removed a thick ribbon-bound document. "We are all present. Let us begin. This is the last will and testament of Beatrice Mary Vance, executed on the 11th of September, 2024, 6 weeks ago." He began to read. The preamble was standard, with minor bequests to the staff and the distant cousins. A generous donation was left to the local hospice. Alistair and Scarlett listened with growing impatience, their smugness returning. These were just the opening moves. "Now," Abernathy said, pausing to look over his spectacles at Alistair, "we come to the matter of the primary estate, including Blackwood Manor, all associated properties and controlling interest in the Vance Industries Master Trust." Alistair leaned forward, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. Scarlett placed her hand on his arm, her knuckles white. This was the moment of their coronation. "To my grandson, Alistair James Vance." Abernathy read his voice, a steady monotone. "I leave the sum of £100,000. The silence that followed was absolute. Alistair blinked. 100,000, he repeated, his voice a strangled whisper. That's a mistake. A typo. You mean 100 million? The document is quite clear, Abernathy said, not looking up. I also leave him my late husband's collection of vintage cufflinks in the hope that they might remind him of what it means to be a gentleman, a quality he has so profoundly failed to demonstrate. Scarlett's manicured hand flew to her mouth. The distant cousins gasped. Alistair shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. This is insane. She was senile. Undue influence. This is a farce. Please be seated, Mr. Vance, Abernathy commanded, his voice hardening with authority. There is more. If you contest this will in any way, the no contest clause will be activated, and you will receive nothing. Alistair, pale and trembling with rage, slowly sank back into his chair. Abernathy continued. As for Miss Scarlett Dubois, who has been a frequent guest in my home, I leave her with the following advice. New money, shouts, but true wealth whispers. I trust she will find her own way in the world, as she will no longer be finding it with the Vance family's resources. To her, I leave nothing. Scarlett let out a small, choked gasp, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Abernathy turned a page, and now the residuary clause. All the rest residue and remainder of my estate, both real and personal, including but not limited to Blackwood Manor, and its contents my controlling shares in Vance Industries, held within the Beatrice M. Vance Master Trust, and all financial accounts I give, devise, and bequeath as follows. He paused, lifting his gaze to meet Evelyn's. To a new irrevocable trust to be named the Lily Vance Legacy Trust. The sole beneficiary of this trust is to be my great-granddaughter, Lily Evelyn Vance. The assets are to be managed for her benefit education and well-being until her 25th birthday, at which point she will assume full control. Alistair looked on, utterly defeated, but a tiny flicker of hope remained, a trust for Lily. He was her father. He would control it. But Abernathy wasn't finished. He delivered the final devastating move. The checkmate. To manage this trust, to execute its duties with full and absolute authority, I appoint a sole trustee. This individual will have complete control over all assets, voting rights, for all shares, and will be the sole resident and guardian of Blackwood Manor. She will receive a handsome annual salary and have ultimate discretion in all matters pertaining to the estate and the company. That sole trustee is Mrs. Evelyn Hayes Vance. The words hung in the air, electric and immutable. Sole trustee, Mrs. Evelyn Hayes Vance. For a full 10 seconds, the library was utterly silent, the occupants frozen, as if in a tableau. The only movement was Lily, who, oblivious to the monumental shift in power, was quietly tracing the patterns on the mahogany table with her small finger. Then the silence shattered. Alistair let out a sound that was half laugh, half strangled sob. No. No, it's not possible. She can't. The housekeeper, maybe. You, Arthur. But her. She knows nothing. He pointed a shaking finger at Evelyn, his face a mottled canvas of purple and white. Scarlet was the first to find her voice, and it was a shriek of pure, unadulterated fury. This is a joke, a sick, twisted joke by a bitter old woman. This mousy little nobody cannot be in charge of anything. We'll fight this, we'll drag you through every court in the country. Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at Scarlet, her expression one of mild pity. On what grounds, she asked, her voice cutting through Scarlet's hysteria with surgical precision. Beatrice was certified of sound mind by 3 independent physicians a week before she signed this will. Mr. Abernathy and 2 senior partners from his firm were witnesses. There was no undue influence. In fact, I had not seen Beatrice for 6 weeks prior to her passing. The will is ironclad. Isn't that right? Mr. Abernathy gave a curt nod. It is the most legally fortified document I have ever had the privilege of drafting. He then turned his steely gaze on Scarlet. And Miss Dubois, you have no legal standing to contest anything. You are not family. You are not mentioned as a beneficiary. In the eyes of the law and this estate, you are nothing. The word nothing struck Scarlet with the force of a physical blow. Her rage dissolved into a desperate panic. She turned to Alistair, her carefully constructed mask of sophistication crumbling to reveal the grasping avarice beneath. Alistair, do something. This is your birthright. She's stealing it from you. From us. Alistair, his face ashen, rose from his chair and staggered around the table toward Evelyn. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic, wheedling desperation. He dropped to his knees beside her chair, a gesture so demeaning and unexpected that even the distant cousins recoiled. Evelyn! Evie, he pleaded, reaching for her hand. She moved it away before he could touch it. Please, you don't understand this world. The company, the finances, it will crush you. Let me help. We can run it together. For Lily. Think of Lily. We can be a family again. I'm sorry. I was a fool. I know that now. It was a mistake, all of it. It was a pathetic last-ditch performance, a desperate grab for the power he had just lost. 5 years ago, those words might have shattered her. Now they were meaningless. She looked down at the man kneeling at her feet, the man whose laughter with his mistress had nearly cost her everything, and she felt nothing but a profound and final emptiness. She stood up, forcing him to look up at her. For the first time, he was literally beneath her. A family, she said, her voice dangerously soft. You speak of family now. When you were in a hotel bed in Zurich, while our daughter was fighting for her first breath. When you allowed that woman. She flicked her eyes towards Scarlett, to live in my home, to sleep in my bed, to spend the money meant for your child's future on couture and sports cars. You destroyed our family, Alistair. You burned it to the ground. She paused, letting her words sink in. And you are wrong. I do understand this world. Beatrice and Mr. Abernathy have made sure of that. For the past 5 years, while you were playing the lord of the manor I was studying, I understand every trust, every stock, every loophole. I understand the power I now hold. Power that you will never touch again. She looked over at Mr. Abernathy. The will grants me sole residency of Blackwood Manor. Correct? Effective immediately? That is correct. Mrs. Vance, he affirmed. Evelyn's gaze swept over Alistair and Scarlett. Her voice was no longer soft. It was clear, commanding, and absolute. The voice of the new matriarch. You have 1 hour to pack a single bag each and vacate the premises. The head of security will escort you to the gate. Any personal belongings left behind will be disposed of. Any attempt to contact me or my daughter will be met with a restraining order. Any attempt to access company funds will be treated as theft. Alistair stared at her, his mouth agape. Vacate Evelyn. This is my home. Not anymore, she said simply. Scarlett, seeing her future of wealth and status evaporate before her eyes, lunged forward. You bitch! She screamed, her face a contorted mask of hate. You manipulative, scheming bitch! Before she could take 2 steps, 2 uniformed security guards who had been standing discreetly by the door moved to intercept her, each taking an arm in a firm, professional grip. Mr. Abernathy anticipated there might be some emotional difficulty, Evelyn stated calmly. Please escort Miss Dubois to her room so she can pack. As they dragged a screaming, cursing Scarlett from the library, Evelyn turned her attention back to the broken man on the floor. Get up, Alistair, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Have some dignity. He slowly, shakily got to his feet. He looked around the room at the portraits of his ancestors, at the books that lined the walls at the crest above the fireplace. He looked at it all as if seeing it for the first time, and for the last. Why, he whispered, his voice cracking. Why would she do this to me? Her own grandson. Evelyn finally gave him his answer, the one Beatrice had armed her with years ago. Because she despised weakness more than anything. She told me once that power doesn't grant immunity from consequences, it only delays them. Your consequences have arrived, Alistair. She didn't do this to you. She did it for Lily. She was preserving the Vance legacy by placing it in the hands of someone who understands its value, not just its price. The phoenix had risen. Not in a blaze of fiery, vengeful glory, but with the cold quiet and unstoppable force of justice. As Alistair was escorted out of the library by another guard, a defeated man stripped of everything he had taken for granted. Evelyn walked to the grand bay window overlooking the gardens. She picked up her daughter, holding her close. Lily rested her head on her mother's shoulder, and together they looked out over their new kingdom. The battle was over. The reign was just beginning. In the hour that followed, Blackwood Manor underwent a swift and silent purge. There was no drama, only the quiet efficiency of Evelyn's will. Alistair, a dazed ghost in his own life, and Scarlett, reduced to sputtering rage, were escorted from the grounds with a single bag each. Evelyn didn't watch them go. She was in the library with Mr. Abernathy, signing the documents that officially transferred an empire into her hands. Her signature, once timid, was now a firm, confident slash of ink. Her first orders were simple change every lock and air out the master suite. Every trace of them was to be gone. Her reign began not with vengeance, but with control. Days later, she convened an emergency board meeting for Vance Industries. The men on the video call who remembered her as Alistair's quiet wife expected a figurehead. Instead, they faced a strategist. From Beatrice's chair, Evelyn systematically dismantled Alistair's failing pet project, citing financial data and contractual flaws he had clearly never understood. "This project is a vanity play," she stated, her voice calm but absolute. "We are terminating it. My office will circulate a new proposal this afternoon." The board's stunned silence was her coronation. Life at the manor transformed. The oppressive atmosphere of deceit was replaced by peace. Evelyn began erasing the scars of Scarlett's gaudy taste, restoring the home's quiet elegance. Her true focus, however, was Lily. They had breakfast in the sun-drenched conservatory and walked the gardens in the afternoon. Evelyn was determined that her daughter would be raised with love, not entitlement, understanding the responsibility of her name without its suffocating weight. One evening, Mr. Abernathy approached her on the terrace. "The audits are complete," he said quietly. "Alistair and Miss Dubois embezzled a significant amount. We have more than enough to press criminal charges." Evelyn looked out at the sunset, painting the sky. Sending Alistair to prison would be a final public humiliation, a harsh justice. She thought for a long moment before giving her answer. "No," she said softly. "Let it go." "But Mrs. Vance," he protested, "he stole from his own daughter's inheritance, and he lost everything because of it." She replied, "His name is ruined. He has no fortune, no home, and Scarlett left him the moment the money was gone. He is irrelevant. For a man like Alistair, that is a fate far worse than prison." Beatrice wanted to preserve the legacy, not destroy the man. Her reign would not be defined by the man who wronged her, but by the future she was building. The laughter of the mistress was a faded echo. The wife who fought for her life was a memory. In her place stood the matriarch of Blackwood Manor, her hand held firmly by the little girl for whom she had conquered a kingdom. Evelyn's story is a powerful testament to the idea that true strength is not the absence of pain, but the courage to rise from it, stronger and wiser than before. She transformed betrayal into a lesson, heartbreak into a fortress, and victimhood into ultimate victory. She reminds us that justice doesn't always arrive like a clap of thunder. Sometimes it's a quiet, meticulous plan, executed with breathtaking precision. Her journey from a hospital bed where her life hung by a thread to the head of a boardroom where an empire hung on her every word is a story of incredible resilience. What do you think was the most satisfying moment of her revenge? Was it the reading of the will or her quiet decision not to press charges, proving she was above their petty games? If Evelyn's story of triumph over treachery moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And for more unforgettable stories of karma, justice, and empowerment, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.